when people are incapable of engaging with you about the politics of a movie, that's a sign that they're not very deep, right? When you sit there and try to politically analyze a film and say, what is this film saying, and they can't engage with you, that's a sign that they're not really politically that bright. For example, Slumdog Millionaire, right? Won the Oscar. I despise that film. I despise it. Is it well made? Sure. Do you feel good afterwards? Sure. It's a happy story. What's the message of Slumdog Millionaire? I despise it politically, right? Because the message of the film is basically that India is a primitive, barbaric, third world country, but lo and behold, luckily Western capitalism is saving it from itself. It is a colonialist, neoliberal propaganda film, if ever, right? It is Ayn Rand at the movies, right? What's the premise of the movie, right? There's this very low-income, Indian boy who's on the show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and he's answering all the questions correctly. And if you go through his life, every anecdote in his life is like a capitalist propaganda thing. Like, for example, at one point he's working at the Taj Mahal. This just shows you what the movie's about. He's working at the Taj Mahal as a tour guide. He, of course, doesn't have a license to do that, but it's like he's moving ahead. He's, working at the Taj Mahal. And, the people who run the Taj Mahal see him and they start beating him up, right? And so then, as he's being beaten up, this American couple runs over to him and saves him. And he says, now you see what the real India is all about. And then the American couple pulls a $20 bill out of their pocket and said, well, here's what the real America is all about. And gives him $20, right? There's another scene where he's standing in a construction site with his brother. And, and he looks out and there's all this construction going on. He says, I remember when this was just a village. Yes. And of course, imperialism doesn't bring development. But regardless, I remember when this was you get the impression the Western capitalist system is raising India out of poverty, which is the opposite. Right? Or, what's the entire thing, right? The movie begins with them torturing him. Why? Because he couldn't possibly know all of that, right? He's the great man, pulling himself up by his bootstraps, being punished for success. It was like the message of the film was that India is poor and impoverished and third world and socialist, basically, socialistic. But luckily, Western capitalism is saving it from its primitive, barbaric, socialistic self. That was basically the message of the film. Awful movie. Just downright awful. But so many leftists that I talked to couldn't comprehend that was the message of the film, right? That it's the great man being tortured for success. It's, here's what the great America is all about. They couldn't get the message of the film, right? They just couldn't get it. And as far as they were concerned, I had a leftist tell me it was a progressive movie. It was a progressive movie because it showed poor people in India. It's like it doesn't occur to these people that saying that poor people exist in India is not in itself a progressive thing. Right? That level of, that level of not getting it. And it was like, maybe you disagree with me. It was they couldn't even disagree with me. No, it's a progressive movie. It shows poor people in India. I'm like, yeah, but not everyone's a Marxist. Not everyone agrees that people are poor because, no, it shows poor people in India. It must be progressive. It's that level of thinking, not much depth. They couldn't even understand what I was saying when I was criticizing it. Another example of this kind of thinking, the movie Cold Mountain. Right? This is a movie about the Confederates, right? It's about the Confederacy. However, it's the Cold Mountain is where all these poor low-income white people who are being drafted to fight for the Confederacy are going away. They're fleeing, right, to the Cold Mountain because they don't want to fight, right? And the whole point of the movie, if you watch it, is the Confederacy is run by the rich slaveholders, right? These low-income Confederates are deserting, and they're running away to Cold Mountain to get away from fighting because the Confederacy is this rich slaveholder sending them to die, and they're miserable and they're being treated awful, and it shows the Confederacy as being an abomination. But I met people who insisted the movie Cold Mountain was racist. Why? Well, the heroes are Confederate soldiers. It's like, how do you argue with people like that? And you say it's showing the Confederacy is evil. No. The Confederate soldiers are bad. And if you have a movie where there's Confederate soldiers in it, it's racist. And it's like they can't understand that, yes, Gone with the Wind is racist propaganda. Cold Mountain is the other side of the story. It's saying that, look, the Confederacy was awful. Look how miserable these soldiers didn't want to fight. They ran away to Cold Mountain to get away from fighting for the Confederacy. They were being sent off to die for the slaveholders. It was a very progressive movie, right? And it was showing, in essence, what was wrong with, what was, but again, when there's not depth, about these things, it's a sign that somebody doesn't quite get it, right? For example, The Dark Knight Rises, the Batman movie that came out just after Occupy Wall Street, right? Where the villain, Bane, is like a progressive and a socialist, right? Come on, right? That was clearly a right-wing film, right? He frees all the prisoners, and it was like, and the heroes are a bunch of cops who go in to protest a bunch of leftists and all of that. Someone's saying Bane is Bernie Sanders confirmed. Exactly, right? The left are the villains, the police are the heroes for beating up the villains, right? It couldn't get more blatant, but I've had people sit there and say, well, but it's, they don't, it's like, when people cannot understand political messages in movies, it's a point of frustration of mine. And it's not that they have to agree with me. You can disagree with me all you want, right? Someone there saying they don't agree with me about Slumdog Millionaire. Okay, but you understand what I'm saying, right? Like, as I'm saying this, you're not going, what? No, but, like, you understand what I'm saying, you just don't agree with me. When people, it's like, the idea that movies might have a political message, it's like, no comprendo, it's a big pet peeve of mine, right? Like, for example, I've talked about this before, right? But the movie, the Magnificent Seven, right, which was a remake of The Seven Samurai, which was itself which was then remade to be A Bug's Life, right? That was written by a kind of Marxist filmmaker in Japan, The Seven Samurai, the original one, right? And if you watch it, it's a Marxist analogy, right? So, right, I'm going to explain this without giving away. Well, if you've seen Seven Samurai, The Magnificent Seven, or A Bug's Life, basically what's happening is this, right? So you have this village, or this ant farm, or this village in Japan, or this village in Mexico, where there are these people that are poor. And there's these poor, low-income folks, and every year they get robbed by a gang of robbers, right? Or it's an ant farm, and every year they get robbed by a bunch of grasshoppers. Or it's, in Japan and Mexico, and so every year they get robbed by these robbers, right? And they're all very short in this village for some reason, or they're ants and they're grasshoppers, right? And so they send someone to go find some heroes, some fighting guys to protect them, right? And so in Seven Samurai, they find Ronin, they're samurai that no longer work for anybody. They no longer have a master, so they're Ronin. In Magnificent Seven, they find seven, like, kind of outlaw guys. In A Bug's Life, they find the circus or the city bugs. It's like a ladybug and stuff. Anyway, lo and behold, they find these guys to protect them from the robbers, from the grasshoppers, from the plunderers, or whatever. So lo and behold, so the guys come. Why do I say lo and behold so much? I need to drop that phrase. I'm annoyed with myself for using it. But anyway, so the guys come. The seven guys, the seven people, the seven samurai, the seven cowboys, they show up, and they're there to protect them. But the guys kind of lie about who they are. They're not who they say they are. The circus bugs, they're circus bugs. They're not fighting bugs. The samurai have all been, they're Ronin. They've all been cast out by a master, so they have a dishonorable reputation. The seven Magnificent Seven are outlaws. They're not actually sheriffs or something like that. It's been a while since I've seen the movie. And so the people feel betrayed. They're like, you lied to us. And so they're just downtrodden. And they feel awful. And then, of course, just like every year, the robbers ride in. The grasshoppers ride in. The people robbing them come on in. So, lo and behold. And so the people are demoralized because they had all their hopes up that this year they were going to fight back and protect themselves. But they're going to be robbed. What are they going to do? It's awful. It's awful. Well, however, the people suddenly get inspired, and they fight back. And they realize that all along they didn't need the Magnificent Seven. They didn't need the circus bugs. They didn't need the Seven Samurai, right? They didn't need them all along. They could do it themselves, right? And what is it saying here? The vanguard party does not overthrow the bourgeoisie on behalf of the proletariat. It inspires the proletariat to be aware of its own strength. Right? It empowers the people. It shows the people how strong they are. The Magnificent Seven showed the people, the short Mexican villagers, that they could defeat the bandits all along, right? The Seven Samurai showed the people of the Japanese village that they could defeat the raiders and the robbers all by themselves. They didn't need it, right? The circus bugs showed the ants that they could defeat the grasshoppers all along, right? That's the message of the movie, right? It's about the role of a vanguard party. It's about how the vanguard party empowers, it pushes people to be aware of their own strength.